Okay, gewaltig. So yesterday, the first part of the Gemara was trying to understand the ish by Erchin, what it's for. So the Gemara started with Lasuya Yidayim Shedim Mechichais, that Yidayim Shedim Mechichais are not a good Yidayim. The Gemara said maybe it could teach us the halacha of a parfin, that Lo Nitna Naziris Ela Lahafla. So if two people see someone approaching them, and one says, if that's Reuven, I want to be a Nazir. The other one says, if that's not Reuven, I want to be a Nazir. Either way, the person's not a Nazir because he didn't, at the time when he articulated Kabbalah's Naziris, it wasn't clear if he would end up being a Nazir or not. Maybe that's what you learn from there. Or the other thing that you might learn from the Ish is, of the Kiyafli Ish, is it says Kiyafli twice, once by Nidarim and once by Erchin, once by Naziris, to tell you that Heter Nidarim has some type of Makar in the Torah, because there's two Kiyaflis. One Kiyafli is an expression that would create Isser, meaning there's no Pesach for it. And the other Kiyafli is a Kiyafli, an articulation that would not lead to Isser. It would be Heter because there could be a Pesach. So that would be like the remes, so to speak, for Heter Nidarim, which then takes us to Samach Beis Amid Beis, where we learned that there is a chomer that Avadim has the Noshim, because even though by Noshim he could be Mefer, because by Noshim a husband could be Mefer, which totally and permanently eliminates the Neder or the Naziris, but by an Eved, the Adon is just able to protest and force the Eved, who's a Nazir, to violate his Naziris to do his work. But once this Eved is freed, then the restrictions of the Naziris that the Eved was Makabel while he was under his Adon now set back in, because the Adon is not able to eliminate the Naziris. All the Adon could do is tell the Eved to ignore the Naziris, so it shouldn't impact the Eved's productivity. So the Gemara ended up telling us that by Nidarim, if an Eved made a neder that would be detrimental to his production, meaning it would impact his Adon in a negative fashion, the Adon doesn't have to be moicha against that neder. That neder has no validity on its face at all. So the Adon wouldn't have to say anything if a Eved made a neder that would be detrimental to his productivity. By Naziris, there's a chiddush that you could make Naziris even though it's a davar or aser. So therefore, the Eved, though he cannot make a neder that's detrimental to his Adon, the Eved could make Naziris that's detrimental to the Adon. However, the pasuk tells us by Nedarim, which is a halacha that we apply to Naziris, it says lesser Israel nafshoy. The pasuk tells us that although the Naziris is chal, even though it's detrimental to the Adon, nevertheless the Adon can force the Eved to violate the Naziris while he's working for him. And then we had a machlokes: if an Eved runs away, would the Adon say drink wine because I don't care, you're not working for me anyway now? Or will the Adon say let him not drink wine because then he might want to come back, because if he needs a drink of wine and he can't have one while he's free, maybe he'll consider coming back to be my Eved so that he can have a drink of wine. That's the Gemara that we learned yesterday, which takes us to the Gemara today, which is Samach Gimel Amar Aleph. It's one of the more complicated sugyas of Naziris. It looks like Naziris is going to go out with a bang. It's not going to be light agada to Gemaras. For that, we're going to have to wait for Soita, which will be at Hashem on Friday. But let's start the Mishnah. I'm sorry?
Or the last one of losing.
Oh, the last one will get easier?
Last one, yeah.
Okay, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach. Okay. Zog Tehelig Mishnah. Nazar Shagilach. We're learning about something called the phenomena of Tumas HaTahoim. And we'll see what it is, and we'll see what halachas it impacts. Nazir Shagilach. The Nazir completed his term of Naziris, and he got his haircut. So he brought his karbanas, and he got his haircut. And then V'noyaloi, someone tells him, Yankel, aren't you a Nazir? He said, yeah, I just finished my Naziris. Because you finished your Naziris last week. Didn't you walk down this street? He said, yeah. But you hit a mace. So you became Tomei. Someone tells him the place where you were, you might not have realized that there was a mace there, but in fact there was. And although you think you completed your Nazir successfully, you did not. Zok the Mishnah im Tuma Yadua, if it's a known Tuma, meaning there was a mace lying there on the street and you couldn't have walked by it without coming into contact with that mace, soiser. In fact, his Naziris is bottle and he's got to start all over again. However, Vim Tumas Tahoim, if it's a Tumah Tahoim, and we're going to soon see what it means is, if you look at the fourth line of Tosfos, Tosfos defines a Tumas Tahoim as She'ein Echad Ba'olam Makira. Nobody in the world knows about this Tumah. This Tumah is unknown. If it's a Tumas Tahoim, if nobody knows about it, or at least at the time when you passed over the Tumah, no one knew about it. Obviously, someone knew about it later on because they brought it to your attention. But if at the time nobody knew about it, now everybody asks, I don't understand, how could it be that nobody knows about it? Someone at one point must have buried this mace. He's covered. Even if he could die and fall on the floor, but if he's covered over, someone must have covered him over. So there are those who learn it doesn't mean that there was never anyone who knew about this mace. It means now in the world, nobody knows about this mace.
Archaeologists of Musovki group.
Oh, that's right. Bim Tumas Tahoim. Bim Tumas Tahoim Einoi Soiser. If it was a Tumas Tahoim, Einoi Soiser. The Gemara is going to try to find a Makara in the Torah for it. At the end, the Gemara is going to say it's Halacha L'Moshe Messinai. One of the great features of Halacha L'Moshe Messinai is it could have so many specifications and details that cannot be justified in a svara, and we don't have to come up with a svara, because if it's Halacha L'Moshe Messinai, no questions are asked. Zok the Gemara. It's very similar, like when your mother tells you something, you do it because your mother said no questions allowed, because I'm the mom. Okay. Zok the Gemara weiter. Im at shaloi gilach, if you found out about it, or if the Tosfos explains it, if you find out about it before you took your haircut. So that means you might have finished your term of Naziris, but you hadn't yet taken your haircut. Benkach ubenkach soiser. It will be soiser. So that's interesting to note, because do you have to take your haircut to terminate your Naziris? That was actually a machlokes tanoim. So from our Mishnah, it's clear that our Mishnah holds that until you take your haircut, your Naziris has not been suspended. Because if your Naziris has been suspended, you're no longer a Nazir, you're a regular citizen. Now the Mishnah wants to clarify by giving us specifics about this halacha, which in fact not only doesn't clarify, in fact it complicates it. Ketzad, what's an example? Yorad litbel b'ma'ara. Someone went to Toivel in a cave. In those days, their mikvahs were like how we know the Arizal's mikvah. It's like in a cave. Now, why was he Toivel? Why did he go to Toivel? So Tosfos tells us the reason why he went to Toivel was b'shvil Tuma sheretz. He was Tomei. He was Tomei b'shuma sheretz. And what happened was v'nimtza meis tzaf al pi ha'ma'ira. When he came out of the mikveh, there was actually a dead body floating in the mikveh. The halach is he's Tomei. Let's take a close look at what that means. So I'm sliding over into Tosfos. Ketzad din tumas ha'ta'oim yored litpol b'mayra b'shvil tumas sheretz. He was Tomei tumas sheretz. V'nimtza kezayis min ha'meis tzaf al pnei ha'mayra. And after he left the mikveh, there was a dead body floating in there. I guess the lighting wasn't that good. So when he bumped into something, I mean, he didn't realize that he bumped into anything. Okay. I'm trying to make it more exciting. And therefore v'hel, there might have been a kazayis from the mace in the Myra when he was there, and he was mile on the mace. So could be he wasn't in the water itself. Could be it was like on one of the benches. You know, if you go to Arizal's mikveh, there's like a room in front, and then you go in. Okay. Or maybe when he was there, that kazayis from the mace wasn't there. Zok Tosfos Tomei. That will make this person Tame, it's Nazir Tame. The Sofik Tuma B'Rishus HaYachid Tzveikai Tame. A mikvah is considered a Rishus HaYachid, and we already learned if there's two people or less there, it's a Rishus HaYachid. Sofik Tame B'Rishus HaYachid Tzveikai Tame. We say this person is Tame. Therefore, Zaktoisis, Vim Noidaloi, Afilu Acher Shagilach. This, even if he found out about this May, so after he already completed all of his processes to finish his Naziris, someone tells him last week when you were in the mikveh, there was a mace found there. Tame, this Nazir will be Tame, and of course it will be Seiser. You don't say, you don't say he should be Tar, because it was Tumas Hatahoim. Because it's not a Tumas Hatahoim. It was a mace floating on the water. There was nothing covering it. That's considered a standard Tumah. However, what about Yorat Lahaker? What if he went into a mikvah to cool off? Everybody has been in the basic forest in Tzvas after a long day of going through the basic forest, climbing up those stairs, you're sweating. So even the Litvaks go to the mikveh, they go to the Arizal's mikveh to cool off after a long, hot day in the Tzvas basic forest. So Yorat Lahaker, meaning he was tar at the time. So Tosfos emphasizes the reason why the Mishnah chaps on an example of Lahaker is because he was tar. So the halacha is Yored Lahaker tar. Then he'll be Yored Lahaker tar. If he went in just to cool off, meaning he was not tummy, he went in with a cheskas tahira, he will be tar. But the tar mitumas mace. But if he went in because he was Tomei Tumas Mace and he wanted a toivel, then he'll be Tomei, Shecheskas Tomei, the Cheskas Tahar, Shereglayim Ladover. We go back to the Chazaka. If you have a Cheskas Tuma, you remain Tomei. If you have a Cheskas Tahar, you remain Tahar. Reglayim Ladover, Zok Rosh is Lav Dafke. It's not really Reglayim. You don't have anything proving that he's Tahar. It just means the Svar is you would go back to the Chazaka. Okay, gewaltig.
What does this Cheskes to?
Oh, one thing, I missed an integral part of the Mishnah. I skipped a very vital line. If it was Nimtza Meis Tzaf Al Piamora, only then it's Tomei, because that's not covered. But Nimtza Meshuka Bakarka Ha'ira. I missed out these four words, which are the most important words in the Mishnah. If the Tumah was found buried underneath the ground at the bottom of the mikveh, that's called Tumas HaTahoim, completely covered over and concealed. So there, Yored Lahaker Tahar. So there you have the halacha of Tumas HaTahoim will be Tahar. Nevertheless, even though you have the halacha of Tumas HaTahoim is Tahar, if you had a Cheskas Tumah, if you came in Tameh, then you don't lose your Cheskas Tumah and you remain Tameh.
Wasn't he, the tumah that he had going in is not tumas mace?
In the third case of the Mishnah is a case where he went in Tamei Tumas Mace.
Yeah.
So what Avigdor is raising is it's a very confusing Mishnah. Because if you're trying to tell me the halacha of Tumas HaTahoim, keep it simple. I went into Toivel Machmas Tumas Sheretz, just like the first case in the Mishnah. If the mace was floating, I'm not Tomei, because I am Tomei. I am Tomei because Sovik Tomei b'Shus HaYachid Tzveikai Tomei. But if I went to Toivel from a Sheretz, stick to the same case. If I went to Toivel from a Sheretz and they found a piece of a mace buried underneath the karka of the mikveh, there you say Tumas HaTahoim. Why does the Mishnah change the case? To really illustrate this shaila of Tumas HaTahoim, stick to a simple case, the case of the ratio. You toivel for Tumas Sheretz. You did not have a cheskes Tumas Mace. You just were Tumas Sheretz. You went into the mikveh, and then you came out. If the Tumah was floating in the water, it was not Tumas HaTahoim. Therefore, you say you're Tumah. If it was not floating in the water, rather it was found underneath the floor of the mikveh, then it's Tumas HaTahoim, and then you're Tahar. That's really the simplest and clearest way to express the shaila. Yet the Mishnah comes up to the second case. If you went to cool off then you're tar. Even if you didn't go to cool off, even if you went to toivel from Tuma Sheretz, you're going to be tar. So why did the Mishnah change to Yored Lahaker? And then the Mishnah offers a third piece of information: is even this rule of Tumas Atahim, that will only protect you from becoming Tameh because of Sovek Tameh B'Shus HaYochid, without a Chazaka. But if you walked in with a Cheskas Tuma, then even the Kula of Tumas Atahim won't help.
But
So
if your Tameh Mace going to the mikveh is not going to help you. So what does it mean? You went to the mikveh.
No, it means you already had your Azor Shlishi and Shvi, and now this is the final component of your tyrant. Thank you for bringing that up. So the long and short of it is, in order for Tumas Atahim to save you, there has to be many, many conditions. Condition number one is it has to be buried underneath the ground of the mikveh. Condition number two is you cannot have a cheskas tuma. Right? Those are two very important chazakas. And we're also going to see that this isn't a rule by any tuma. This is only a rule that applies to a Nazir and some other cases. It's not a general rule about all type of tumas. So now we need to understand, why did the Mishnah complicate things by changing the case of Yored Lahakir? It should have stuck to the same case. You're toiveling to be matar yourself on Tuma Sheretz. So Tosfos tells us, you know how the Mishnah always wants to maximize the amount of Chedushim? So the Mishnah is trying to tell us a completely separate Chiddush that has nothing to do with this Shail of Tumas Atahim, and therefore the Mishnah changes the case, even though now we have to figure out the complication of it. So Tosfos tells us, you know why the Mishnah said Yored Lahakir Tar? Because when you're going to cool off, you're carefree. You're not concerned about Tumah at the time. You're not very careful. You're just trying to cool off after a long sweaty day. So there, it's very possible you could have come into contact with a mace and you wouldn't have noticed it. Zok Tosfos, we say that you're tahar anyway. In the Reisha, we were saying that when it's not a Tumas Atahim, you're tamei. Why? Zok Tosfos, you might think, yes, Sofik Tumah B'Shus HaYochid Tzvekei Tamei. But if you're going to toivel because of Tumah Sheretz, so then Tumah is on your mind, so you're being careful when you're toiveling, you're looking around, you're making sure there's no Tumah there. So it would be, you'd have an awareness. So that's all the Mishnah is trying to tell us, an extra finish. That Sofik Tumah B'Shus HaYochid Tzvekei Tamei, even if you're looking, even if you have an awareness, we're still concerned maybe you came into Tumah and you didn't know about it. On the other hand, by Tumas Atahim, where we're saying you're going to be Tahar, that's even if you were totally oblivious. And it's very possible that you came into contact with Tumah without even noticing it. That's item number one. Item number two is Cheskas Tumah makes you Tameh. So even though it's a Tumas Atahim, if you came in with a Cheskas Tumah, we say that you're Tameh. This is a makar for a big Bamba Sugya. Now, we know that the longest Sheva Bracha, we know Sheva Bracha speeches is an affliction in Klal Yisrael that we haven't yet figured out how to avoid. It's one of the things that everyone complains about, yet everyone does it. So I believe the originator of the long Sheva Bracha speech was the Tzois HaChoshen, because he wrote a sefer called Kuntras HaSveikis. It's a big fat sefer, and there's 7 shtiklach in that sefer, and each shtikl he said over by his Sheva Brachas. And I assume the Olim probably understood what he was talking about. His guests were probably Bamba Talmidei Chachamim, and I'm sure they didn't just let him speak; they probably hacked in as well. So the Kuntras HaSveikis brings down a very famous Maharit. There's a very famous shaila: are you machzik me iser le'iser? And I'll give you a practical example. An animal, even a kosher animal, when it's alive, has a cheskas iser of ever min achai. It's a live animal. When you shech the animal, let's say there was a suffix if the shechita was good. If the shechita was good, it breaks the cheskas iser, and now you have kosher meat. If the shechita was not good, it remains aser, it becomes an avail. So the question is, do you say there's a chazaka of iser? It was aser before because of ever min achai. Now, if there's a suffix on the shechita, we have an iser of nevela. Or do you say, no, the chazaka was only that it was an Ever Min Achai. There's no chazaka to say that it's an Avela. So you don't make a chazaka from Isser to Isser. That is one of the very famous shailas discussed in the Kuntras HaSveikis. the Maharit brings a raya from our Mishnah that machzikin me'isr le'isr, because our Mishnah says that if you came in Tamei Tumas Meis, then Tumas at home doesn't save you. You follow your Cheskas Tuma. Break the Marit. I came in with the Tumas Meis that I already spritzed on an old mace. This mace that you want to say makes me retain my Cheskas Tuma is a new mace. So that's not the same mace. So you have a raya here that machzikin me'isr le'isr. That is the Marit's raya from our Mishnah that machzikin me'isr le'isr. All of the Achronim jump on the Marit with a variety of different arguments. One argument is, how could you bring a raya machzikin me'isr le'isr? If you're a Tameh and you haven't discharged your Tuma and you traveled to the mikveh and you touched a mace, you don't transfer a different Tumas mace. You just never got rid of your original Tumas mace. So how could you consider that machzikin me'isr le'isr? It's the same Tuma. The Rambam has a shita, the Mishnah Malach is medayik from the Rambam. When you go to the mikveh, when do you become tahar? When you dip in the mikveh or when you leave the mikveh? So there are those who are medayik from the Rambam that the tahira that you get when you go to the mikveh is when you leave the mikveh. That's a very Litvisher approach. The kedusha comes when you leave the mikveh, not when you go to the mikveh. So if that's the case, so weiter, how could you say machzikim me'isr le'isr when you left the mikveh? You were tamei. There's no separate chazon. So this is what many people jump on the Marit to ask, that this shouldn't be considered machzik me'isr le'isr. That was just an aside. So now the Gemara is looking for the Makar. How do we know this concept of Tumas HaTahaim? Mino Hanamili. How do we know that there's this concept that Tumas HaTahaim is not a Tumah? And just to be very clear, Tumas HaTahaim does not make you not Tamei. You know, this Mishnah story is not speaking about a regular Joe. It's speaking bedafka about a Nazir, as the Gemara is going to clarify. Or somebody is going to make his carbon Pesach. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai of Tumas HaTahaim is not a general rule of Tumah. It applies only in two very specific cases. Although now, at the point of the Gemara doesn't know that yet. The Gemara is still entertaining that we learn this from Psukim. So it says regarding a Nazir, if a mace suddenly dies on somebody, it says alov. Alov means on you, mean you know about it. You're very aware. The only type of mace that will destroy your Naziris is a mace that you're aware of. You're not aware of. Rish Lakish Omar, we know it from a different pasuk, a pasuk by Carbon Pesach. Omar Kra, Ki yiyeh tamei lenefesh oy b'derech rechaika. Those two people don't make Pesach Rishon, rather they make Pesach Sheni. I guess you could say Shmuel's father-in-law says that the Lublina strikes again because we're learning now about Pesach. So we learned Kiderech, Tuma that prevents you from bringing the Carbon Pesach has to be similar to Derech. Ma Derech Begili, just like the road is open and clear. I've called Begili, the only type of Tuma that will prevent you from bringing the Carbon Pesach is a open Tuma. So it's interesting that it seems from our Gemara that Rabbi Eliezer learns it from the Nazir, but for some reason it's applied to Pesach, because we know the halacha applies to Pesach. Rish Lakish learns it by Pesach, and somehow that's going to be exported to Nazir. I don't know exactly how. The Gemara in Psachim also discusses this sugya. And the Gemara in Psachim says, how do we know it by Pesach? From Rish Lakish's pasuk. How do we know it by Nazir? From Rabbi Eliezer's pasuk. And they're not arguing. They're just saying how you know it in each case. From our Gemara, it seems quite clearly that Rabbi Eliezer is saying this is where you know it everywhere by Nazir, and Rish Lakish says, how do I know it everywhere? From Pesach. Anyway, so now that we have our two approaches, break the Gemara Kasha. What is the definition of Tumas HaTahaim? It has to be a Tumah that no one in the entire world is aware of. But if there's even one person that knows about this Tumah, even though I'm totally oblivious to it, but there's someone somewhere that knows about it. Ein zu tumas hatahoim. This wouldn't be tumas hatahoim. Break the Gemara. Bishlama levan da Omar ki derech. If you learn pshat like Rish Lakish, it makes perfect sense. It has to be like a derech shapir. Meaning, if anybody knows about it, then it's like a derech. If nobody knows about it, then it's not like a derech. But if you know like Rebbe Eliezer, that the only type of Tuma that impacts a Nazir is a Tuma that he's aware of, Allah, he needs to be aware of it. Why is it that if there's somebody in the world somewhere that's aware of this Tuma, why should that impact the Nazir status? Allah, I have to be aware of it. And if I'm not aware of it, it's not a Tuma. So if the Makar of Tumas HaTayim is Allah, then the parameters of Tumas HaTayim should be if I know about it, not if anybody else knows about it. Therefore, it's going to be shver. So we have another problem with these Lamudim. We're going to run into this price on the base. There was a mace that was found after you passed over there that was lying across the road in such a way that it would have been impossible for you to travel down that road without having coming into contact or being nihil over that mace. The halach is, if you're a kohen and you want to eat truma, with truma tameh, we will say that a kohen may not eat truma because he's tameh, even though it's a hidden mace. Tumas at the home, like we said, doesn't apply to all tumas. So if a kohen walked over a tumas at the home, we consider him tameh, he's not allowed to eat truma. But the Nazir, if it's a question of the Nazir became Tameh and destroyed his Naziris, or B'asiyas Pesach, can a person make a korban Pesach after he passed over such a situation? Tahar. Maishna. If we learn it from a pasuk about what defines Toma and what doesn't, how could you cherry pick which parashiyos in the Torah it applies to and which parashiyos it doesn't apply to? It should apply to everything. Maishna. It must be that Tumas HaTahoim is a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Once it's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai, there's no room to ask why this and why that. It's exactly as it was told to us by Moshe Messinai that this kula only applies to a Nazir, only applies to someone who wants to make a korban Pesach, only applies if there's a cheskas hahira, only applies if it's completely covered over. Which is very interesting, because you could have a mace that's floating in a remote river in the Grand Canyon somewhere, and that's not Tumas HaTahoim. You could have a mace that's on Baker Street that's covered over with a sheet. That's called Tumas HaTahoim. It's all in the detail. Of course, it has to be that no one knew about it. Okay, the Mishnah says, Im at shaloi gilach. When does Tumas HaTahoim work? It only works if you didn't find out of it, if you did not find out about it until after his giluach. But if he didn't make his giluach yet, then for sure it will be soiser. So that's another limitation to Tumas HaTahoim. It's only not going to impact the Nazir if he wasn't aware of it until after he made his giluach. That means giluach is important. If everything hinges on giluach, it must be giluach is important. But we had a machlokes tanoim earlier in the Masechta if giluach is important. If you need giluach to discharge his naziris, Dr. Gemara Montana, who is the Tana of our Mishnah, who gives importance to giluach. Amar B'yoichan Rabbi Eliezer, he's Rabbi Eliezer, the Amar taglachas makeves. It's Rabbi Eliezer who holds that taglachas before the nazir does his taglachas, naziris is not discharged. Dr. Gemara. Rami Bar Chama is going to ask a question. We're about to see the epitome of what it means Lashon Nazir Meshuna, because we're going to have a very interesting, the Gemara is going to bring a shaila that Rami Bar Chama asked, the Gemara is going to push the shaila, and then the Gemara is going to dissect the shaila and dissect the tshuva to the shaila. So basically the Gemara is going to be the Gemara, then the Gemara is going to be Rashi, then the Gemara is going to be Tosfos as well. Boy Rami Bar Chama. Nitma b'soich malois. Now, this isn't necessarily a shaila that's related to Tumas HaTahoim. Tosfos says this shaila is whether it's a Tumas HaTahoim or whether it's a regular Tumah. A Nazir became Tameh within the 30 days of his Naziris, but he didn't become aware of it until after his Naziris was over. But on day 31, he found out that on day 15 he became Tameh. Mahu. What is the halacha? Basar Yediyah Aslina, the Yediyah Acher Meloisi. When you assess the Tuma and its impact, do you follow when we found out about it? And he found out about it after he counted the 30 days. So therefore, it won't be Soiser now. Whether or not it will be Soiser depends on another machlokes tanoim. We had a machlokes tanoim. What happens if you counted your 30 days, but you didn't do the process of discharging your nazir yet? The giluach according to your your karbonis. What is the halacha? There's a machlokes. The chachamim say it's soiser 30 days. The shaila is not according to those chachamim, because regardless if it was after Malois, but before the giluach, it's soiser 30 days. Our shaila is according to Rabbi Lezer, who holds it's not soiser at all. And Vibalt, it's not Soiser at all. It's Soiser 7 days. What does that mean? What it means is it's not Soiser at all, but you cannot bring Karbonis if you became Tameh. So you have to be Matari yourself. So we call it being Soiser 7 days, but it's not really being Soiser or anything. It just means it delays your process for 7 days. So that's the question. And therefore he only has to wait 7 days. Or no, since the actually occurred in the Naziris, it wipes out the entire Nazir and he has to start again. Ulamai. Lamista. The question is to be Soiser. So let's turn on to Amud Beis. Zok the Gemara. Amar Rabba Toshima. What does it say in their Mishnah? Im ad shaloi gilach. If this occurred before he was Megaleach, Benkach ubenkach soiser. No matter what type of tumah it is, it will be soiser. Hey chidami, let's analyze what precisely is the Mishnah talking about and what's the chiddush of the Mishnah. Idis yadalei b'soich malois. If he became tamei in the middle of his naziris and he became aware of it in the middle of naziris, shrichel meimar. Do I need our Mishnah to tell us that that's soiser? I mean, we're already within 3 blot of the end of the Masechta. By now, I think everybody knows clearly that if someone became Tameh after 15 days and he knows that he became Tameh on that day, everybody knows that's Soiser the Naziris. At this point of the Masechta, we definitely don't need a Mishnah to tell us that. Ella, the Mishnah must be telling us a greater Chiddush that we might not have known yet. It must be speaking where, although the Tumah happened during the Malois, he only found out about it after the Malois, and our Mishnah says that it's Soiser. The Mami know that it's Soiser. Now the Gemara is going to dissect the Shaila and the Tshuva like a Rashi and a Tosfos. Let's think about this. Will it be Soiser the entire Naziris, or would it only be Soiser 7 days? Leman, who is this Shaila according to? The Rabbanon holds even if you were becoming Tameh after the Malois, it's Soiser everything, as long as you didn't bring your Karbonis yet. Rabbi Eliezer says Kolachem Malois Shiva Soiser. Rabbi Eliezer holds that if you became Tameh after Malois, it's only Soiser 7 days, meaning you have to wait 7 days before you can bring your Karbonis. Amar Loch, you're right. Where does Rabbi Eliezer say? And we know clearly there's no question about that it's Soiser 7. If he only came in contact with Tuma after the 30 days. Our question here is he became in contact with Tuma before 30 days, but he only became aware of it after 30 days. That's what our Shaila is. Here he actually became Tameh before the Malois. He just didn't become aware of it until after. That's what Rabbi Bar Chama is questioning. Or maybe you say that since the Yediyah was after the Malois, it's not Soiser. We know, and from the Mishnah, we also know what the answer to that question is. Katani benkach ubenkach Soiser. Our Mishnah says, regardless, it's Soiser. It doesn't make a difference if I found out about it before the Malois. It doesn't make a difference if I found out about it after the Malois. Either way, it's only going to be Soiser 7 days. And that was the Gemara and Rabbi Bar Chama. Interesting enough, it's pretty obvious from our Mishnah what the answer to Rabbi Bar Chama's question is. Tosfos actually says, could be Rabbi Bar Chama, who asked this question, was not aware of our Mishnah. Because from our Mishnah, it's pretty obvious that even if you found out about it after the Malois, it's still going to be Soiser 7 days. Tana Rabbanon. Go back and drill down about the brisa we learned yesterday. Simple brisa. Hamoitzi meis mutal l'rochva shel Someone walked down the street, and afterwards it was determined, it was found out that there was a tumas hatahoim, there was a mace buried underneath the road. L'truma tamei. If this is a kohen and he wants to eat truma, we consider him tamei. He walked over a mace. Tumas hatahoim doesn't apply to him. But Nazir, if he's a Nazir, or ba'oisa Pesach, and he's an oisa Pesach, then he will be tahar. Once again, our mission says, by a Nazir, it's only tahar if he found out about it after the Malois. Where do you say this halacha? That's only if there's no way he could have walked down the street without having passed over the mace. What if there's some gaps? The body's not in one piece, or there's room along the side of the road. There would have been a place where a person could have theoretically walked and not have come in contact with the mace. Even for truma, he'll be tar. It's over Tuma b'shus harabim misvekei tar. This halacha only applies if the mace was found in one piece. Avol meshuber or mefurek, if the mace was in pieces, afilu ein malkam laver chayshinan kema ben aprokim over. So imagine you have the body parts, but they're not lined up straight across the road. They're lined up. There's one in one position. The next piece is maybe a foot out. The third is another foot out. So they're sort of lined up in a diagonal. So technically, if you walk the straight line, yes, you would for sure have walked over the mace. But if you walk crooked, you could have walked theoretically in between the pieces. So therefore, if there is if it's meshuber mefurik afilu in mokum laver, we still will say he's tar. Because it's possible that he avoided the Tuma bein prokim avar. However, ubekever, if all of these pieces are in one kever, as we learned, a kever sosum spreads the Tuma to the entire area of the kever, and therefore afilu meshuber or mefurak tamei mipnei shekever mitzarfur. If all of these pieces, even though they're separated, are in one kever, then the entire area of the kever, which covers the entire width of the road, is tamei, and therefore you're for sure tamei. This what we say, that if the body's in pieces, it's possible that you avoided walking right over a piece. That's if you were walking on your feet. Avol tone, but if you were bent over a rochov or riding on a wagon, now if you're bent over, it means you cannot walk in between the raindrops. You're for sure leaning over as you're walking. So there are you, even though you technically could have had your feet not right over the mace, but your body, one way or another, would have made an oil over the mace. Therefore, we say tamei. If you're walking straight, if you're walking on your feet, standing up straight, well, then you might have walked in between the raindrops and avoided the tuma. But it's impossible that you were able to walk across that road and you didn't either touch tuma, you didn't step on it and cause it to move, or you didn't become an oil over it. Zok Brisa. This halacha that we're talking about here is only betumas hatahoim. That's only if it was a tumas hatahoim, it was buried under the ground, no one knows it's there. Avol tuma yedua. But if we know there was tuma there, and it's not a tumas hatahoim, the lost on tmeim, all of these people, even walking, are going to be tamei. The eizoi he tumas hatahoim. What is the tumas hatahoim? Kol she'ein makira echad b'soif ha'olam. That's if nobody in the world is aware that this tumah is there. Makira echad b'soif ha'olam. If there's even one person in the world who knows about this tumah, ein zu tumas hatahoim. This no longer qualifies as a tumas hatahoim. What about it was hayatamun b'teven or b'tziroidos? The body was covered over, whether it was with straw or rocks, it was covered, and nobody knows about it. Harezu tumas hatahoim. That qualifies. But what if it was biyamim? It was just floating in a river or in an ocean somewhere. Or bafela, it was in a dark place and people didn't see it, not because it was covered, but because it was dark. Or with the kikah asloim in different crevices. Ein zu tumas hatahoim. And once again, it's halacha l'moshe Sinai. So the parameters are dictated whether they're logical or not. And this whole thing that tumas hatahoim is not matama, that's only Lagabe Tumas Mace. It's not Lagabe Tumas Sheretz. So if someone was trying to make the Korban Pesach and he encountered the Tumas Sheretz this way, he will not be able to bring the Korban Pesach. But if it's a Tumas Mace, then he will be able to. Okay, we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem, we finished Daf Samach Gimel, and we're closing in on the end of the Masechta. So the Rebbe Shem Shirabos should be able to finish with a Geschmack.
But there's no Tumas oil Tumas Sheretz.
No, you could have touched it by mistake. So, have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Safe drive.
Thank you very much.